For decades, pregnant women have been told that one pain reliever is, without a doubt, safe. Acetaminophen, the active ingredient in Tylenol. It's been the go-to recommendation from doctors all over the world. But what if that advice was wrong? Today, we're taking a hard look at that core assumption, because a lot of new data suggests it might be linked to the incredible rise in neurodevelopmental disorders we've seen over a generation. And this, right here, has been the absolute bedrock of advice for expecting mothers for a long, long time. I mean, when other common pain relievers were flagged for potential risks, acetaminophen was always presented as the one safe harbor, the only option for managing pain and fever. It's a message that's been deeply, deeply embedded in medical practice and, let's be honest, in all of our minds. And that brings us to the core conflict of this whole situation. There's this wave of new research that's starting to show a potential link between this supposedly harmless drug and the really sharp generational spike in conditions like ADHD and autism spectrum disorder. So we're going to unpack that signal.
Okay, let's dive right into this. This isn't about one single outlier study that you can just dismiss. What we're looking at here is a persistent pattern that's being identified by top-tier researchers at places like Harvard, Mount Sinai, and the National Institutes of Health. And they found a signal in the data that is just becoming too consistent to ignore.
A really comprehensive review came out in 2025. It used this super rigorous method called the navigation guide to basically pull together all the global evidence. And their conclusion? Well, it was stark. They said the data supports a consistent association between taking acetaminophen during pregnancy and a higher incidence of neurodevelopmental disorders in children.
Right, and this isn't just a statistical ghost hunt. There are clear biologically plausible ways this damage could actually happen. We know for a fact that acetaminophen freely crosses the placenta, and in a developing fetal brain, which is incredibly vulnerable, it can deplete a really crucial antioxidant called glutathione. That leads to something called oxidative stress. On top of that, it can also act as an endocrine disruptor, messing with the very hormones that are essential for brain development. And what this suggests is the risk might not be the same for every single person. The harm could be concentrated in fetuses that have a specific genetic vulnerability, maybe a reduced ability to produce that master antioxidant, glutathione. So for them, the acetaminophen could be the first hit that sets off a chain reaction and alters how their brain develops. So in response to this emerging signal, a major counterargument showed up. In early 2026, a huge meta-analysis was published in the Lancet. And really, this was framed as a defensive reaction, the definitive final word that was meant to reassure everyone, the public and doctors, that acetaminophen is, in fact, totally safe.
And this is the central conflict, right here on the screen. On one side, you have the Harvard and NIH-backed review identifying a clear and persistent warning signal. And on the other, you have the Lancet meta-analysis declaring there's no clinically important risk. I mean, they can't both be right. So what is going on here? Well, the defense's entire conclusion rests on one specific type of study it chose to prioritize. It's called the Sibling Control study. By comparing siblings where one was exposed in the womb and the other wasn't, they found absolutely no link to autism, ADHD, or intellectual disability. It looks like a total slam dunk for safety, but is that methodology actually reliable for this kind of investigation? Well, critics, including the very authors of the NIH review, argue that the methodology the defense is banking on isn't just flawed. It might actually be introducing a bias that hides the real effect. So here's the idea behind it. Siblings share a lot of the same genes and the same family environment, right? So if one sibling is exposed to acetaminophen in the womb and the other isn't, any difference in their outcome should, in theory, be because of the drug itself. It sounds pretty clever, but it has a couple of potentially fatal flaws. Okay, flaw number one. Remember that two-hit model? If a whole family shares a genetic vulnerability that makes them susceptible to acetaminophen's toxic effects, the sibling control design just sees that as another shared family factor, and then it statistically subtracts it out, which effectively erases the very thing it should be investigating. It's kind of like trying to study how a key works by controlling for the existence of locks. And the second huge problem is just data quality. Acetaminophen is everywhere. It's over the counter. So studies that are relying on medical records or a mother trying to remember what she took years later, they're dealing with incredibly noisy data. And this particular study design is really, really sensitive to that noise. And this right here, this is the knockout punch. In one of the massive Swedish studies that was central to the defense's argument, the reported use of acetaminophen was only 7.5%. But
Other data from the exact same time and place shows the actual use was closer to 50 or even 60%. That means more than 5 out of every 6 users were likely misclassified as unexposed. The study wasn't comparing exposed to unexposed. It was basically comparing exposed people to other exposed people, which almost guarantees you're going to find nothing.
And look, this isn't just a minor complaint. The authors of the NIH review said it directly. This specific study design, which is the entire foundation of the all-clear verdict from the defense, it's just fundamentally questionable for this topic. Its limitations cast really serious doubt on how reliable its findings are.
So if we basically have to set aside the defense's main piece of evidence as being unreliable, what does the rest of the cumulative research tell us? Well, when we look at the broader pattern across dozens of other studies, a very, very different picture starts to emerge. Looking back, this signal has been building for years. A 2018 meta-analysis found increased risks for both autism and ADHD. Then in 2020, a major study actually found physical biomarkers of the drug in umbilical cord blood were linked to higher risks. Another study in 2022 found links to attention and sleep problems. And this all leads up to that big 2025 review, which confirms the association is consistent across the board. This isn't one finding, it's a chorus.
And then there's the big picture context. Now, we all know correlation is not causation, but it is impossible to ignore this trend. Over the exact same decades that acetaminophen use in pregnancy became completely ubiquitous, the rates of these neurodevelopmental disorders have absolutely exploded. It's a powerful population-level alignment that really adds weight to all the other evidence. So this all brings us to the ultimate question. We have a persistent warning signal on one side, and then we have a defense built on what seems to be a questionable methodology on the other. In a situation like this, with the health of the next generation literally at stake, what is the responsible path forward?
Well, in public health, this is where something called the precautionary principle comes in. It doesn't demand absolute 100% proof of harm, which can take decades to get. It says that when there is a plausible, credible threat, the responsible thing to do is to err on the side of caution. The burden of proof should be on demonstrating safety, not on proving harm. So let's just boil this down to the core issue. The evidence that points toward a risk is substantial, it's consistent across multiple studies, and it's backed up by plausible biological mechanisms. At the same time, the primary evidence that argues for safety, well, it relies on a methodology that experts say is prone to error and may systematically hide the very risk it claims to disprove. Which leaves us with one final, unavoidable question. Look, this isn't about causing panic. It's about applying caution. Untreated fever and severe pain during pregnancy carry their own risks, and those absolutely have to be managed with a doctor. But for more discretionary use, based on the weight of the evidence we've just looked at, a pretty clear recommendation emerges. Until we know for sure, the risk is likely not worth it.